I think we will record the session. Yeah. Hello, everybody. We will record the session. I think you already had to confirm it. Yeah. Welcome to this session titled Kickoff for a Decentralized Large Language Model. And probably some words on Rocketstar Foundation and also how we set up this session and what we want to achieve with it and what the ideas are behind it. Rocketstar Foundation is a DAO and an European cooperative, and we are working on real-world use cases of Web3. And one of our main focus areas is data and AI. And there we are linked into the data community, for example, with GaiaX, My Data, and AI Association of Germany, but also working on regulatory aspects. For example, we are currently started a project where we research on the topic of decentralized data trust. So if we get into the topic later, you will probably see some aspects that can be applied to large language models also. And we are a platform shaper in an economic sense. And one of the platforms we are starting to shape is called Pingtapir, which is around people data. And yeah, my name is Andreas Fauler. I'm a founding member of Rocketstar Foundation, and this session will be co-run by Andreas Krisor, who you can see also, and also Paul Goller, both also from Rocketstar Foundation. Some words on the idea around the decentralized large language model, but I already recommend you join the Miro board because at the first we will soon be working on it. So please already go onto it. Why a decentralized large language model? We are from the EU, and here there's a big hype around we need a EU-based large language model. But the question is really what will be the advantage of an EU-based centralized large language models? For example, there are some players in Europe, Aleph Alpha, Neomic, Mitral AI. Some of them raise hundreds of millions, but not billions of euros or US dollars. So the question is, how can you catch up with the existing players? What might be additional characteristics and functionalities or contributions of decentralized large language models compared to centralized ones? And at the end, does it make sense to create decentralized large language models? And of course, in which context? Now, some words on how we want to run the workshop. I will share the Miro board now. And as I see, most of you are already there. So it should be available now also. We are on the first sheet or first tablet. Here, our idea is that you can leave your name, your domains of interest or expertise, and also if you want your email address. One of our ideas is really to have a community-based, community-first approach, and really not only have this session, but continue to work on it in a community-first way. So if you leave your email address, we have the chance to follow up with you via email, and probably later also in other areas. The second sheet that will be touched later will be around the domains where a large language model might be helping or might be interesting to be formed. And the third sheet will be why does decentralized large language models make sense, and also what might be needed to get there. And the last thing is really in this community, if we want to continue, what would be nice next steps in a community-led large language model project. And the very last thing, it's a surprise that Paul and we have already shared. At the end, we will also provide a pope for this session and also be linked on the blockchain by that. With that, I see that a lot of you already have started to fill out the introductory spaces. I see some people still filling it out. I see blockchain, of course, but also machine learning engineer, trusted seed gardener, token engineering, DAO enthusiast. So I would say more people from the Web3 community, some also with AI and machine learning, AI context, and some with both, which is really cool. So I think we have a chance to get the convergence between the two worlds, which is one of our goals, of course, to work together across these communities. I would say, let's move to the first or the second sheet. So I recommend everybody to go right, sorry, to the first sheet, and I'm handing over to Andreas Piso now.
Yeah, hello everybody. It's great to have this community started already. So we have a lot of work to do in this session. So time boxing will be really tough, but I think we will manage it. And at first we will engage with you to first identify and talk about the fields of applications for large language models in general. We all know what the typical applications are, but maybe there are some also in the business context. So first idea or first part of this exercise, which only should take 5 minutes, just everybody can take one of these yellow sticky notes and just write down a field of application. Can be a kind of business function, an industry, whatever you can think of where LLMs are of great relevance. And in the next step, we would cluster. If we have like 50 sticky notes, then that will be in a cluster exercise. But in the next step, we would like to place them on this matrix where we together would see what is the relevance of a domain and what do we know about the maturity. So is it, let's say, a very advanced model, and is it very capable, or is it in the kind of early stage? So we set a timer. Andreas, maybe you can set the timer. It's above maybe for 4 minutes. So everybody, let's start to write down things you might know about where these LLMs are.
Do you want us to plot them already, or do you want us to just put them up there and then we plot them together afterwards?
Yeah, it's a 3-step process. So let's put it on the left side. Then we do a kind of clustering, and the clusters we would put on the map. Yeah?
Okay, all right.
Andreas, if you go above, there's a timer. So maybe you can set it so that everybody can see it.
Ah, oh, I got it. Sorry.
So let's take 3 minutes.
And while we do this, can I ask a stupid question? Is this going to be shared in a similar way as the other Miros we have in the Unconference? Because I noticed this is maybe tailor-made, separate.
I think we can share it. Yeah.
Good, thank you.
Still some people writing down stuff.
Okay, great. So a lot of stuff already on the board, and of course you did intuitively, you did some clustering already. So let's give maybe 2 minutes so that we can use the wisdom of the crowd to arrange all the items on the board which are similar, and then we can have a short discussion about it, and then group them together and talk about the the 2 dimensions what we see on the right. Maybe you can choose some music, Andreas, for the silent phases. Okay, great. So I think we have a wide already a clustering which makes sense. I just want to put it in an open mode. So we have a couple of things which are where we have a couple of items sticking together. So some of them are more related to some industries, some more to business functions. So if anybody, so what we see here, MedTech here below, then we have on the upper left, we have skills, education, so people data. Then we have creative stuff, regeneration, creative tech. Here we have everything, of course, around DAO, governance stuff. Then I think here in the middle, it's a typical natural language processing, something about law, and some other specific things. So is there anybody who would shape the clusters differently, or are you fine with this kind of clustering? So then in the next step we can put every item in this matrix. We have to shrink it a little bit so that it fits.
Can I just ask a question? In the DAO cluster, there's something called GovTech. Whoever put that in, does that mean governance technology, or does it mean government technology?
Mm-hmm.
Governance technology.
All right, okay, then I'm happy with that cluster.
Okay, so then we can enter the next stage. We have 2 dimensions for the portfolio or the metrics. So I think the first one, I think it's more easy to have an assessment in this group about the relevance. And after that, if we are able to, we can put all the things also on a maturity level. And we provided an overview about large language models. Andreas, maybe you can scroll down a bit so that everybody can see this. So this is just the kind of input we have provided. Let's see if we can do both dimensions, but let's first start with the relevance. Everybody can grab a cluster and put it somewhere, and if someone is not happy, then you can move it around, and let's take 2 minutes to find the first initial, let's say, placement, and then we can have another round. If somebody wants to move the clusters, we can adapt it in the second round. All right.
Everything seems to be relevant.
Yeah. So it's a good pre-filtering.
And I think the availability of the required data can be a proxy for the majority. At least this is one of my ideas, but probably also discuss it in general. But
I think there's some missing, or maybe a dimension you want to add here is the challenge of implementation. Because I think everything's going to be super relevant. The question is, can you actually implement it?
okay, probably that is in the next phase an interesting question.
Yeah, but it's just to build on what you already got. It's super cool. I just thought it would be interesting. Well, you could circle back to the session we had on Monday where we talked about the ease of implementation. So
would be interesting to discuss based on which criteria you can assess the complexity of implementing it. But let's also discuss it later, probably.
Yeah.
So we have 2 clusters left, which are outside of the matrix. Is anybody so keen to place it? Yeah, very good. Okay, so we can enter the next stage. So maybe we can have put it to the open space. So if anybody can or has a perspective for any of the clusters, and of course the idea is to have or use such a matrix if we see there's a high relevance for a certain area of application, and but the maturity, and that can mean anything. So the point about the feasibility of implementing such a thing is of course one dimension. Andreas mentioned already the availability of data. If I do not have enough open or proprietary data, then maybe the maturity in the sense of the quality of the models and the applications are lower. So that can be all, I think, be indicators or joined in this maturity dimension. So the sweet spot is here in the lower right. Topics with a high relevance, but where we see the maturity is rather low. That should be the sweet spot. That was the idea for this exercise, to have a kind of a heat map, and maybe we can afterwards pick one of these clusters in this section as a maybe a first prototype or whatever object to work on in the future.
I like the people dimension that is in the middle of the bottom right, so skills, workforce planning, and so on, because I find it very interesting in the context of AI, because you replace work somehow, and then it will be really interesting to see, okay, can you create new things? What is it? And how can you align workforce demand and supply? And this is really something I think is one of the biggest challenges in the AI space, because a lot of people are afraid of it and so on. So it has a two-sided benefit. And I also think the data is very spread around different players, individuals, companies, education providers, and so on. So really bringing together all these players could be a difficult task, but still rewarding. So I like this dimension very much, or this domain.
Yeah. So any comments from you guys?
Yeah, I would just actually go here with you, Andreas. I think it's a super relevant topic here, this people topic. And I also see a lot of potential there using LLMs. As always, it really depends on the data that you have available, right? But I think it's definitely something that could be followed up on. Yeah.
So I have also two remarks. The code pilot is in the upper right. I think that is exactly right. It is of a high relevance, but it's working already very good. Actually, I used also ChatGPT today to create some Python stuff. It works, and even Excel, VBA. What I see a little bit different, we have MedTech health is here in the middle. I would put it to the highest relevance from my point of view. What do you think about that? Is it good in the middle of the relevance, so medium relevance, or should we put it here up to the right? Yes,
I agree. And I see the GovTech DAO and so stuff. I mean, it's very interesting for us, but I think for the general public, probably less. But I would say health and all these topics are the most important ones. And also a lot of unused data and really a lot of costs related to the MedTech topic.
Okay, guys, so we are very good in regards of the time box. So please, if you have any comments or ideas, of course, it's not a right or wrong stuff. It's just getting in sense where we can or should focus in the next phases. So any comments or insight or something to move?
And I think especially probably we will, in follow-ups, we will mostly look on the bottom right quadrant. So if there's something you think it should be in the bottom right for follow-ups, probably mention it. Otherwise, probably this will be the focus point for further considerations.
Okay, great.
Can I suggest we move regeneration, this upper left, down with skills and education? As I see it, if there's going to be a lot of people displaced, I know that we have in my view, we have an epic task ahead of us to regenerate whole landscapes, restore, water basins and river basins, etc. And that is one place where we need skills and training and perhaps a large language model that's focused on regeneration. So I don't know if that makes sense to you all.
You mean in the most general sense regeneration, or especially for climate or this kind of stuff, or really in a broad sense?
More broadly, because
More
regeneration,
broadly,
the regenerative movement or culture or
yeah.
Renaissance is really impacting everything from tourism to health, to agriculture, leadership. It's a whole spectrum of impacts that it's having, and sort of verticals, if you will. Landscape regeneration, agricultural, regenerative agriculture is one of the fastest growing sectors. And then, I recently met a fellow who's working on regenerative health AI, and that area, the Hippo Foundation.
That's I mean, it's a cross-domain topic somehow, at least if you look at the data. It can be financial data, it can be climate data, it can be a lot of data involved. Probably, yes. So it's cross-domain, I would say. For example, there's always also smart cities communities. It's also sometimes a quite high prioritized topic, but it's also cross-domain. But probably we need to think of how we deal with it. Yeah. So I would say maturity is very low, I would say, and relevance pretty high. Yeah.
Okay, so it moves from this section to this somewhere here.
Yeah.
Again, it's just an indication, so it's not a right or wrong stuff. Okay, so I think we have 1 minute left for another comment. Anybody?
I would move it up a notch, the regenerative. I just actually asked GPT-4, and there's quite a lot of examples of regenerative use of generative models. So, well, not something like that, yeah. So just don't put it too immature like that. That's probably good.
Okay, but still in the sweet spot. Sorry.
Yeah.
I think I would just maybe suggest that we add a component. It's sort of in between med tech, healthcare, skills and education, but cities, we didn't really talk about. And I think this gets to the point a little bit about the environment, but the environment that people are living, working in, and thriving in. I think that cities tend to be pretty relevant. I think they can also be sources of very rich data. So I don't see anything represented there in terms of where people live, like the environment that they live in. And I thought maybe cities belonged in this.
I agree, yeah. And it's natural connection, a natural community and environment. And there's some form of preloadedness.
Put architecture in the cluster of regeneration. Architecture can only become a field, like 3D generation.
So I will add a post-it with cities, and then it's, well, cities.
Yeah.
I would say, let's say cities communities. By the way, at Gaia X, it's also a cluster which is quite active. We could add it to the governance topic, but it's more in the sense of governance, not government. So yeah, probably that makes sense. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So as we mentioned, the idea was to get a sense, is there something to do for LLMs and DLLMs? Yes, there is. So that with that we can move to the next section, and that is about talking and getting ideas around setting up a decentralized LLM. And we would like to start with a why. So we prepared only 2 things just to cover that. So where do we see on the left hand, where do we see some limitations or risks of proprietary LLMs, how we see it from ChatGPT, etc. And on the opposite, where would we see chances or strength or whatever benefits from a decentralized LLM approach? So again, open to the crowd. Andreas, you can set the timer. Let's say for, yeah, let's take 4 minutes. You can choose a nice music, pick music.
Come on, there.
Whatever.
Yeah, can I just ask, how do you define decentralized LLM?
A single company owning the LLM, for example, OpenAI or some of the other players, Google or so. And decentralized, but it's a good question. Probably you also should discuss it. From our perspective, it's decentralization like we understand it in the Web3 space on a ownership level, governance level, and probably even more data collaboration, work collaboration, and compute, decentralized compute. So it as with Web3 always, it could be on different layers. And when we identify the downfalls of centralized ones compared to decentralized ones, we probably get a hint of where we need decentralization. This is a general idea, but it's really first thinking. Main idea was.
Can I just? I think this is. I'm sorry. I'll put in a caveat here. I think we need to sort of think open source versus open access. So OpenAI, I guess I start calling it closed AI now, but it's open access, but it's a closed black box where a centralized attack vector controls everything.
Okay.
Open source LLMs, we have about 15 good ones with like 55 billion parameters. They can be extremely useful in this space, but they're not like in the trillion parameter space. So I'm sort of like, when we say decentralized, I was sort of thinking that doesn't really exist yet because you can't put it on a blockchain. You need to have it as an oracle and store it somewhere in a decentralized something. And you know what I'm talking about. So
Yeah.
just sort of
Right.
we're hijacking maybe a bigger question here, aren't we?
Yeah, it's true. We haven't seen a decentralized LLM today, but that's the idea to kick it off. And if you see, we named it proprietary LLM, so that is true. The aspect of centrality versus open access. So if you say proprietary LLMs, that includes, it's kind of central organized, but it's also a single organization doing all the stuff, but taking all the benefits also, or monetize it. Yeah?
I think it's a good point from you, Henrik, that you're raising here. And if we talk about chances, strengths of decentralized LLMs, maybe it would be useful to make the distinction between chances, strengths versus proprietary centralized LLMs and chances, strengths versus open source centralized LLMs. So I think it could be good to make this distinction here at that point.
I think there are even more dimensions, I would call it, but probably it's also worth collecting them. Yeah, I mean, one area that brought us on the topic was we are talking about this data collaboration. We are working on the decentralized data trust model. And there, the idea is to cross-organizationally collaborate on data and create insights, benchmarks, KPIs, and probably AI models also. And there we see it might be a means to unlock data in a different way than typical LLM approaches can at the moment. So that was one of the main ideas we had in mind. But we can put it into this form, I think, based on the strengths and risks. And I would say we can derive the domains or the characteristics from the risks and strengths. That was at least the idea.
Okay, thank you.
But let's collect it also. Should we do a side area where we collect the dimensions, or how would we call it? Does it make sense, or is it
I have a suggestion. Let's first maybe let's write down, use the sticky notes to yeah, get the beneficial things and the not so beneficial things or risks, and let's assume that we have propriety and closed source as a first step, and then maybe we can, based on the input we can maybe do a kind of clustering again, or differentiation with these two aspects.
So for me, it was really helpful to think about these 3 dimensions separately. So one is the data provider, somebody put it here. So this is basically the question, who owns the data that is used to train the model? Then the next thing is the compute. This basically means who has the computing power to use to basically make use of the data, because not every one of us has the capabilities to really train big LLMs, at least for now, so compute. And the third thing that we described as access, I wrote down in this API bubble here, because this is the question, who gets access to the trained models. So for now, whenever I use LLMs now, I basically use a pre-trained model. So if you think about this 3 different dimensions in terms of values, for me, this was really helpful.
Okay, so maybe we can have an interactive discussion. If we think about the LLMs which are existing and the setup of what we see, if it's open source or not, if it's proprietary or not, where do we see some limitations or risk, or are we totally happy with the current situation of using ChatGPT, etc.?
I think data is the main or the most limiting source in the game. And the organizations that are already having the most data, big tech, are in the best position to really run away from the rest of the world based on this fact. So access to data, I think, is one of the most critical parts.
Yeah, and I think also what Paul mentioned, right, that access to compute or having the resources to actually train these LLMs, which takes a lot of compute resources and very, very expensive, which then boils down to the same players that can actually afford that. So that's also, I would say, limitation or risk of the proprietary LLMs, and probably even of the open source LLMs. There's one very famous one that was created by Databricks. It's open source and can also be used for, let's say, commercial use cases. But obviously they collected the data and they also had the compute power to create that open source model. So again, it's very, it's a centralized skill here, basically.
Yeah, I think that is often the case if we talk about these the big players and network effects. So both things, compute power and data availability for the big companies, that leads to the winner takes it all situation, where we often, as the rest of the, let's say, world or society, has little chance to compete with that. So we're, in this sense, we are doomed to the beneficial or the goodwill of these companies. So that is a kind of, I think, a risk cluster what we have here. forming monopolies and winner takes it all situation.
And also the large language models, they learn a lot from the world and they can easily compete with their users once they learned everything. So at the end, if you use it, you make yourself obsolete somehow. And there are also data externalities. So if one automotive company uses it extensively and provides the knowledge to the large language model provider about how to run an automotive company, then they can compete with all of the automotive companies. So there is a data externality, an externality based on the data that is provided. So if one collaborates, the others are also losing.
So again, this topic in the end, who owns the data, right? So basically, they are getting the feedback from you on the requests that you are making, and then they are improving their models based on the input that you provide to their model, and then they're actually improving the model and also delivering these improved inputs to other companies. So yeah, it's
so exactly that is the human in the loop part as a contribution which is unpaid currently or unrewarded.
And you can use it to manipulate users. I mean, we know the Oxford Analytics case where systematically data was provided in a way that it influenced the users in a big way. And this can be biased or unbiased or intentionally and unintentionally. So you can do bad even if you want to do good. So really this kind of, it goes to the area of ethical data use and ethical use in general. But this is also a risk. You probably do not want one organization or one person even decide on this. So it goes into the direction of governance at the end.
Okay. I think a good discussion, and again, the idea here was to see, to have a discussion about, hey, is there a need for a decentralized LLM? Maybe we can have a short look. Maybe Andreas, you can zoom in a little bit because you're sharing on the chances and strength, and maybe that's the opposite of the of the red sticky notes. But we have stuff like fair value share, ethical data use, scalable compute, of course. So for one player, it's not feasible or it's hardly feasible to do it. But if we join forces of maybe millions of individuals, we can have this compute power. We could have privacy preserving data collaboration and community ownership. So that's also the proprietary part. Yeah, and one interesting aspect, I think here, composition. So if we can put these more models together, then maybe we can have, or it's better to scale for smaller use cases to address the use case long tail. Okay. I think looking at the time box, we should move on to the ecosystem and actors in a decentralized LLM. So we have already something on the board. We talked about data provider. Of course, that's the most obvious one. But let's think about who can which actors, which roles do we see in a larger ecosystem of in the context of LLMs. So just put it on the board with a note or any comment. Welcome. So data
So
provider.
Andreas, is this now for the what can we do next, or where are we now?
Yeah, the idea is to get some input to think about the next steps, and the next steps would be driven by an actor.
Okay.
For example, we are a community of interests or of enthusiasts for LLMs, maybe decentralized LLMs. So that would be also kind of whatever platform shaper you could call this role, or community. So just to have let's think about who should do something, and maybe we are one of the actors, but there are definitely a lot of other actors. And the idea is in the next part to think about what are potential next steps, very high level, which can or should be taken to ignite this idea of a decentralized LLM.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
In the ecosystems area, I have added auditor and owner governance guys. I think this is largely overseen, and there's also, if you add these, let's say, additional roles, then you get an additional attack surface. And so I think, yeah, we like the trust minimized way of doing it, and you know where I'm hinting to, but this is really something I think is completely overseen, and it even could be relevant or wishful to have the LLM as a public good or publicly governed something, but this is something I think we should also look at.
What about infrastructure? In general, it seems like one of the actors would be tending to the IT, essentially, for lack of a better term. So that sort of like the mechanisms, you've got governance, but I think there's also just the like keeping everything tending to the ecosystem.
Yeah. How would you frame it, or is it already on there? Is it?
Oh, it is. Never mind. Service providers, maybe.
So it would be service providers, yeah. Specific ones, but
yeah. I would also put up the regulators. If we talk about LLMs, there is something like the EU AI Act. Andreas, did you mean auditors in this regard, or more independent auditors to verify no bias, etc.?
In the EU, there's a discussion if there are needed data auditors for data trusts. So it might be useful to have a specific group of people auditing this kind of organizations and models, similar as in the data trust area. So therefore, it would be like a financial auditor, even.
Okay, so maybe let's try to arrange a little bit. So I would say here on the bottom we have the, let's say, IT infrastructure part, maybe data providers, subject matter experts, and users, I think, are kind of similar. Then we have application steward, maybe kind of in between, and this auditor regulator stuff maybe aside, so also part of the ecosystem. And then when we have owner governance guys, maybe, I'm not sure if I understand it correctly, maybe you can explain, whoever wrote it.
It was me. I think of who gets them. It's in the direction who gets the value that is created, and who governs how the system evolves and gets used. So at the end.
Okay, so I think it's next to the data providers because they are essential together with the compute. So does it make sense here in the middle?
Yeah, would think it could be anybody. It could, at the end, everybody who is participating in the ecosystem should be governing it also to some extent, I would say. Everybody who contributes. Yeah, so it makes sense.
Okay, great. So again, any remarks? Are we missing some actors? What about the current players in the LLM market? Are they also an actor? Maybe not a friendly actor. If we set up
Yeah,
a
but
decentralized LLM.
you could use some parts of it, yeah, with open source models, things like that.
Yeah. So should we put LLM providers here as a role? Could be.
How would you distinguish that from algo provider, Andreas?
Yeah, good question. So what's the definition for algo provider?
Good question. I didn't put it there.
Yeah, so I can think of a differentiation between, let's say, a pre-trained model, whatever flavor, open source or closed source or whatever, to make use of. And the algo provider could also be a group of people who are experts, data like yourself, machine learning engineers, data scientists, whatever, LLM experts who, let's say, do the hard stuff, setting up stuff to retrain, to fine tune, etc. So this is more the model part of the, let's say, LLM aspect, and this is more the working part, human aspect.
Engineering.
Yeah. So like data science.
Data science, machine learning, engineering, data engineering. Yeah.
Maybe we can put like ML providers, so like more like humans. Okay, anything missing?
Hey, can anybody just ask a question here?
You sure?
So I see like auditor and regulator there, and I'm wondering if you're referring to these in like the traditional sense, like the regulator, like the current territorial administrations, or if you want to build like analogs for these in this entire ecosystem.
Good question. So what I had in mind, current regulators, which are already like providing some stuff like EU AI Act. So the current point of view. But I understood your point that maybe we can shape a new kind of regulator. Is it right? Or rules to be applied for this kind of stuff.
Absolutely, there is no maybe about this.
Mm-hmm.
And I invite you to read a white paper that I just shared in the chat.
Okay, yeah.
Describing the entire process end to end.
Okay, and Andreas, you mentioned it's data auditor.
Yeah, that's something that is currently being discussed in regards to data trusts. I mean, generally, one of the benefits of a decentralized model is you don't need so much, let's say, auditing and regulation because it's transparent. And a lot of things are self-enforcing if you use smart contracts. So there's one source of potential benefits, but still, I think you need this kind of functions. But probably in a decentralized context, they are much smaller and much more reliable.
Okay, great. I think we've put already a lot of stuff on the board. So now I think that's the most interesting, but also maybe the most challenging part. Can we think of certain steps for this very high level initial stage where we are? Talked about the relevance for certain areas of application like people management, medical. We talked about some risks, some limitations, some strengths. We talked about actors. So can we imagine a set of steps or a process? What can we do first to start a decentralized LLM, it's not easy, but maybe one of the first actions would be to say, okay, if we have a very hot topic, let's take medical stuff. Maybe we can, or I think from a business point of view, validate the hypothesis that is hot topic. That could be initial step. Talk to some, whatever domain we are talking about, talk to some players in the field who maybe are in the role of the data provider, to validate the hypothesis that could be a beneficial idea, what we are talking about today. So like, I just write it down, validate relevance for data providers of a certain domain. And the actor, maybe our community, which we are currently forming.
I mean, there's an assumption in it, I guess, that you mean that data providers are at the same time also users of such a model, because if that is okay, then we should make it clear if you think that.
Yeah, exactly. We have the data providers, and then we have maybe users. We can add that we are talking about data consumer, and they can, or often they would be the same. Data provider are also using their and other data, but of course they don't have to be the same. That's right.
But then I would say for the users and the data providers, there should be a relevance. In that.
Exactly. Yeah.
How are we in the time? I'm looking over.
We are okay because we have 30 minutes left in the session. We are just fine. So if we take, let's say, 10 minutes for gathering potential next steps to build a decentralized LLM.
I would think of data availability being one thing I would check first. Under which conditions is there data? How flattered is it across different stakeholders? So data availability would be one thing that I would check very early also. So relevance and then data availability. Sometimes you have regulatory limitations. Sometimes you have players that are not leaning into such innovative approaches, things like that.
Are the open source repositories of data not sufficient to your purposes for this? Like the public data, is that not enough?
Yeah, I was just thinking that I think it really depends on the domain that we pick. If we pick creative technology, we can really rely on public data that's available to us, and we could concentrate on the compute part, which would be technically interesting and could basically, it could potentially speed up also the process for other domains. But if you start like tackling medical technology first, then of course we have the problem of siloed data. So data is not available to us, at least high quality data. So I would propose to stay with the create tech a little bit more longer, like 1 year or 2 years, and first create some kind of showcase the potential that a decentralized LLM has compared to centralized LLM, and then start the data collection part of the more sensitive, like finance data or medical data. But this is just this would be my personal approach. And also using the creative technology that exists now is so much fun.
That's a good point. I mean, my assumption or my impression is, but it could be wrong, if data is publicly available, all the big players already have used it. So I would assume, for example, OpenAI has nearly used all the data that is publicly available. Therefore, can you add any additional value to OpenAI if you use just the same data as they do? Or how could you do that? And therefore, my assumption would be, okay, if you can unlock zero data, then you can add additional value pretty clearly. But this is probably something we can discuss. But that would be my thinking here.
Yeah, I completely agree with that.
I don't really. What you do with the data is just as important as the data itself, because you can infer something different if you have more intelligence. So the structure of and the size and the logic of the untrained model matters a lot.
Okay. So then you would mean what would you need to be better than OpenAI?
Well, there are lots of applications that are currently developed around OpenAI and using it as a backend, right? And they parse the output of the model through various cognitive architectures that add value for the end user.
Okay.
So there are a number of ways in which you can be creative with the raw model.
But it would be still the OpenAI model.
Well, in this case,
You would
it's an
just
example.
train the OpenAI model then.
Well, right now it's the biggest, but
Yeah, exactly.
you can make maybe a bigger one just through
But the idea is to do it on private data. But that's a good discussion. I mean, if you train OpenAI, what did you win?
You would get, I mean, the people would get the money instead of OpenAI charging everything and making money from the model.
You would charge
that
for the better version. Okay. Yeah.
I think democracy is one of your goals here. I didn't join in the beginning, but
no, that's really part of the conversation here. Where can it add value? Where would decentralization make sense, and so on? So we have different possible starting points at the end.
yeah, this is all super cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe we can dive a little bit on if we would to set up, let's say, any kind of showcase, or we would really start to build a DLM. So what from the, let's say, IT architecture point of view, what would be there, the steps which we have to, or which we could initiate?
I also had another question. Are you guys familiar with the current big efforts in this space and the projects that try to decentralize compute for training, like the Petals project is doing for a large language model, and other architectures that implement that, holding at home for compute, and a bunch of others, because that might be relevant in this context.
Can you maybe share some links here in the chat on what you just mentioned? I think that would be
absolutely
very useful. Thank you.
There's also the alternate white paper, which I think references a bunch of them, but I can share them individually. But in short, there are some limitations that, like the state of the art. I'm super I'm familiar with the latest developments, and there are some limitations when doing it in a decentralized way, technically. Just it's very inefficient compared to having everything inside the single data center. It has to do with latency and swapping stuff in and out of the memory. But it's still like worth pursuing.
And there you were talking about compute only. Yeah, there are other areas also, but absolutely, that's probably the area where it's most difficult.
Yeah, that's the bottleneck for this, because the logical architecture for consensus and organizing polls and how rules are made, there's nothing to invent there. But the actual training and inference and the nodes having a system by which they can do that in a fairly competitive way, because you don't want your language model to answer after a week. That's a challenge. Maybe a week again is an exaggeration, but like Petals does a token per second, which is not serviceable. This
Okay, so are there any other directions, ideas, what basic steps can or should we do, have to be done?
How about the first one, to get up to speed with the progress that's been made? And I think that's a good start.
Sorry, what? I did not get that.
I think that this involves like an initial research step. So, and the first step of that step would be to kind of consume the latest developments, internalize them, and go from there. Does that make sense as a first step?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. How we call it? Like into
Research state of play or state of.
Yeah.
And I mean, what also makes sense at some point, formalize the community, but yeah, I think that's later probably.
Okay, so any other inputs?
I would put in formalize the community also quite early, to be honest.
What else? All right. Yeah, as expected, that is a difficult part. Maybe it's good that we let these ideas and things we talked about sit for a while. So I think if we don't have any, let's say additional inputs to this chart, I think we can move over to the more or less already to the closing section. But I'm not sure, Paul and Andreas, when the surprise is happening.
Paul?
Is it now happening?
Yes, I can share a secret word. Maybe, I guess most of you are familiar with popes, but if you look all the way to the right, I will unlock the surprise. So you can see we have a secret word for our pope. It's decentralized LLM, as it's written there. And so all the people who have popes already, they know how to mint, and all those who don't have popes already, you can download the Pope app in the App Store, then log in with your Ethereum wallet or email. And then on the bottom right, there will be a button called Mint. And there we will be able to enter the secret word, Decentralized LLM, and you will be provided with an NFT from us. So you can prove that you have been attending this session.
I guess let's stay here for some time so that everybody
Happy minting.
follow up.
Maybe it's worth to mention that it's case sensitive.
And you have to press the mint button on the bottom right, but I think there are not many options in the app. I think, should we move over so everybody can do it now? And the ones that already have done it or don't like it can already start looking at the last thing. So I move over here also. And there it's really about we as a community, what could we do next? We ask you to provide your email address if you want to be involved in further communication. So the idea was really to somehow also mainly connect via email then. So if you haven't done so and now have decided you want to be part of following conversations or following sessions, you can still do it now and move forward to the first frame. And yeah, the other thing is what else might make sense. Probably everybody who is ready already can put some ideas on it, but this is really about the very next steps from the community, getting probably access to additional members, things like that. So really these kind of stuff, or probably what kind of session could be next, things like that. I assume everybody is still working on the Pope, because I saw you have to solve some puzzles and so on. So probably takes some more time than usual. We have 13 minutes left, which means we have some time to get onto the what can we do next page and really collect some more ideas. But I would say we should close the session about 5 minutes before, or yeah, discuss it. Yeah, let's say 10 minutes before they have 3 minutes to collect more ideas on how to move on, and then probably some minutes on discussing them and agreeing probably even on some really concrete things. I set a timer until when we start discussing next steps. I would say let's do it 3 minutes from here. And I see 6 people already minted the Pope, but we are still 15 people, so I hope everybody gets it and it works for everybody. Somebody has problems, probably reach out to us on the chat or probably directly chat with Paul. And if someone I see on the list created a community list, that's a good point. We should share it and make it available for everybody. If you want to be on the list, I would recommend to leave your email address on the board, on the very first board, so that we can drive it from there and decide what is the best way to stay in touch and initially collaborate. Okay, and the Pope can only be minted with the app. Yeah, as I see in the chat. So if somebody doesn't have the map, you can download it, and if you have, you can just put in your ETH address, and then you don't need to sign something with your ETH address or anything else. You just need to put in your ETH address. So no need to be able to sign. Just put in your ETH address, and then you can mint with the app. Quite easy. All right, time is over. I would say if somebody has still problems with the minting, reach out to Paul directly probably. And let's move over to the what can we do next frame. Create a community list is very good. I would volunteer to do it based on the feedback on this sheet on the first frame. So everybody's okay. Yeah, I would do it. And probably then we decide how to formalize it in addition to that, if there's a need. Blog post about this session, reach out to thought leaders to join, session to define a concept of a DLLM, decide if we are building or just designing on or either. This should be a DAO. Okay, yeah. Okay. I would say I go over the actions and we see who is volunteering, blog post about this session. NDK, that's a task for you, I would say. Or
I run the session, so maybe our
okay.
fellow colleagues can do it. Or
everybody
we can
who wants to take one of the tasks, put your name behind it. I would say let's do it this way. Sometimes it can be probably also too.
But maybe we can use an LLM for writing that.
Probably you can try it out right away. Yeah. And I mean, at the end, if we have the first step, we can also schedule a meeting to get more into the details of how to move on. I see we only have 7 minutes. I would say let's open it for general feedback and ideas or something like this. Any comments from anybody here? Anything, any ideas in addition? Not at the moment. Let's have a look how many popes we have already. I think we are.
Did you guys go over the benefits for doing this? I'm trying to find it on the board.
Please repeat the benefits for.
Why did you set on this quest? What do you think will bring in terms of advantages to people? Or
we believe it's a worse innovation, especially compared to centralized approaches. And we were wondering if it's possible to set something up community first, not centralized organizations first. So the real motivation for the session was really to create a community in a mostly decentralized way and see if it works to get people working together. Yeah, just based on a joint purpose. And yeah, let's see if this was the first step to do so, or if it will die out right tomorrow. I would say the motivation with some people, I guess, is quite high. So really would be great if some people would really join us at Rocket Star Foundation with this task. And we think it's possible. We think it's worth. And we will see how the community list will grow and how much traction we get on the topic.
I think that's great. And you said for some people, the motivation is quite high. And that's also my case.
Great. Thanks for joining. Thanks for joining, everybody. We are nearing the end of the session. And I see a beautiful picture painted by NDK. He will explain what it is right now.
It's a very easy thing. So also from my side, great discussion. I think it's always a challenge. We don't know who's in the session. Of course, very diverse audience. I think good discussions, good points, but at the end, it's a nice for us also to get a kind of impression. Was it valuable for you? Was it a waste of time, or did you enjoy this session? So yeah, please take one of these balls and place it on this line wherever you would rate the almost 1.5 hour you invested today.
All right. And while we are really ending the end of the session, thanks everybody for joining. Was fun, was some surprising insights, some things we expected or I expected, but I think it's a very small step into the direction we outlined. And I would hope if we meet soon on the topic and really form something that's progressing and at the end creates a decentralized large language model, or at least contributes to the creation of a large language model. Thanks, everybody. And with that, I stop sharing the screen. And yeah, thanks, everybody. Hopefully we see each other soon, and let's move forward with this idea. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, guys. Bye.